Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the meeting of the Police and Crime Panel. I'm going to move to item number 1 and their apologies.
Yes, Chair. Apologies received from Councillor Janet Emsley from Rochdale, Councillor Nigel Murphy from Manchester, Eamon Boylan, Chief Exec, Maksud Ahmed and Ian Hopkins.
Okay. Is anybody else aware of any other apologies? No? Okay, thank you. Item 2, declarations of interest. If there's any items on the agenda today that's up for discussion that members feel that they have an interest in. If so, then there is a form to fill in. Okay, item number 3, the minutes to the Police and Crime Panel meeting held on the 2nd of July 2018. If you can just take a moment to review those. Are there any matters arising?
I've got a member. I wasn't there, but on the item new members.
Can I ask you to speak through your microphone?
Okay, how's it work?
I press the button.
That one? Oh, okay.
Turn the microphone towards you.
Okay, so under new members, welcoming new members, I'm assuming that Councillor Glynn is me and it's Gwyn. Yeah, Gwyn. Apologies. So,
Okay. Welcome. Is this your first meeting?
yeah, because it didn't end up getting notified to me, so I've missed whatever meetings came before this.
Right. Well, welcome.
Thank you.
We'll ensure that's corrected. Are there any other matters arising? No? Okay. Can we move those as a true and correct record? Yeah. Thank you. Okay, item number 4 is the independent members' reflection, and before we move on to that, I just want to take this opportunity to thank both Maksud and Diane for the magnificent contribution that they have made to the Police and Crime Panel over the last 5 years. Some of it has come before I joined the panel, but you know, from what I've witnessed and what I've heard from others, it has been an exceptional contribution. The professionalism which you've contributed to the panel, the experience and the insight that you've brought to a whole variety of issues that have come before the panel. You know, we've been very, very fortunate to have both of you. It's a shame that Maksud couldn't be with us today to share some of the learning. So I want to hand over now to Diane to enlighten us with some of the reflections.
Thank you, and I won't say much in response to your very kind words because I think it's here somewhere within. And I don't want to take up too much of this meeting, but I thought it would be really useful, and when myself and Jeanette spoke about it, we thought it would be really good to give some feedback from the perspective of the independent members, and myself and Maksud did have a conversation before I put this together. So I'll just go through it and obviously ad-lib to somewhat as we do. Okay, this way, yeah. Okay, I called this Brave New World under as a subtitle to scrutiny for the community because certainly for me, but I think for all of us at that stage and the role of the Police and Crime Commission as it then was, it certainly felt like it was a kind of a step into this Brave New World. And then, of course, the concept of independently but collectively scrutinising the objectives and the process of that particular role. Looked at this kind of concept of critical observation and examination. And, you know, I can sometimes write as I think. And for me, that didn't sound too exciting in relation to getting involved at the initial stage. I did think, well, what could my contribution to that critical observation and examination role be? But it was new. The PCC role was new. It was untested, in whichever way we want to view that word. And it was a chance for me, but I suppose for all of us, to find out a little more about the impact of that role, its potential to make a difference, which is really important, I think, to myself and Maksud. And at the same time, offer us both the opportunity to enter a new world. and the world of what we might call local decision making. So for ourselves as independent members, they were the things that, although not initially, but certainly at the end, attracted us to putting ourselves forward. It was also an opportunity which I think is really useful to bring that independent perspective to this collective contribution. Somebody, individually or as a team, to ask that question from a different viewpoint and or to challenge, you know, the potential or the emphasis for the status quo. Having attended lots of meetings in the past 5, almost 6 years, I know that many of you do that. That's obvious through the course of my learning. But at that time, I thought it was something that myself and Maksud could bring to the table. So that was why we came. I suppose the next question really in plain speak was, how was it? And I thought about this. I thought, well, how was it in relation to what I felt my contribution and Maksud's contribution was? And I think in total honesty, initially it was a little overwhelming. In my day job, I'm used to high-level ministerial meetings. I'm used to public speaking. But it still felt, or I still felt, a little apprehensive at my very first meeting, which took place in the town hall in 2012. And at that time, and things have changed since, it was attended by a minimum of 50 people. It was a massive, it was a massive meeting. It included the chief execs, it included elected members, lots of admin support, and from right across the AGMA region. And basically, we didn't know. I didn't feel like I knew what I was doing. I didn't feel like I knew why I was there. And everybody else seemed to have a notion that obviously they understood why they was there, or at least they gave that impression they did, but me at that stage. So yes, initially a little overwhelming. There appeared to be an expectation, although there was some attempt for the previous administration staff to bring us up to speed with what was going on and why it was going on. But there appeared to be an expectation, to be quite honest, that the independent member would just fit in with the current status quo, if you like, in relation to this is how we do things, and you will come through this process and you will just sit through this process and contribute as and when you felt fit. Rightly or wrongly, that's how it felt to both myself and Maksud, because we've spoken. A couple of months after our first meeting and a couple of meetings in, we began to feel a little frustrated with our role. We wasn't sure what we was expected to do, in all honesty. It was the first few months, so we wasn't being too kind of hypercritical, but there was certainly an expectation that we would just fit in. But as we began to kind of understand and speak to the relevant admin staff who were supporting us, and we began to find our feet, which is always, that's a confidence issue, I'd imagine, in any new setting. As we began to find our feet, we began to find our voice. So what changed? Well, for me and Maksud, things settled down. And I think not just for myself and Maksud, but for everybody that was involved in the new PCC role, its administration, and how it was conducting its business at that time. We were offered, we requested and we were offered regular meetings with the PCC at that particular time. And that began to help. That began to form a relationship with the PCC so that we felt more confident and able to understand where, and it was Tony Lloyd, as we know at that time, where he was going with things. And he was very inclusive in how he kind of brought us into his thinking. We started to have regular meetings with the chair of the scrutiny panel. And again, that also helped. Forming relationships. I'm a great believer that relationships are what make things happen. So the better and more productive and positive relationships you've got, then the better able you are to contribute to what's happening. We were then requested and asked, would we kind of be the lead from the panel for the community engagement plan. And myself and Maksud had many meetings with various staff in the PCC's department to kind of contribute to that community engagement plan. And not only contribute to it, but to challenge and critique as and when appropriate. We formed very good relationships with a new with a new administrative team at the time, and that also helps being kept in the loop, being felt to be inclusive and included into the process. It took a few months, and because of that, obviously, our own confidence in the role grew. And we then began to develop an understanding of where we fit and where we fitted between our role and our relationships with individuals and the collective group. So what worked? There was a number of things that we got involved with, and I think it's really important. I mean, we were aware that other police and crime commissioners across the country work differently to the way that Greater Manchester was working, and that's not unusual. But what we were hearing back from peers in other regions was that they attended a meeting and they went home and basically that was it. That's not what happened within Greater Manchester, and that was really useful because as we began to find our feet and our relationships grew, what became apparent is that we could have a really contributive role to play, and not just in the scrutiny role either, in a broader role, because to be honest, and I have to be honest, the scrutiny role didn't give us much leeway to contribute much in essence. So Gmca actually acknowledged that under the Police and Crime Commissioner and said, no, there's more to your role than meets the eye, if you like. And so we was invited as independent scrutiny members to become a part of lots of different meetings and processes and procedures. One of them being, of course, the recruitment of the new Chief Constable then, as Ian Hopkins, and, of course, the next route of being involved in the Deputy Chief Constable recruitment process. We was involved in the recruitment of the Risk and Audit Committee, non-execs at that stage. We were invited to be part of the Barton Moss, the protest panel meetings that included looking at the situation with Barton Moss, and again bring a community stroke individual perspective to some of those proceedings. That included, you know, being invited up to Gold and Silver Command suites when different activities and protests were taking place in the city. We became again the lead for the engagement strategy, particularly around domestic violence. And I suppose the one that we really got our teeth into, if you like, was that we was invited to take an active seat at the AGMA steering group and contributing and allowing ourselves to contribute to the conversations regarding the AGMA policies and projects and what cut across the city, basically. And so all of a sudden it went from not knowing what we were doing to not fully understanding, you know, how much clarity this role had in relation to scrutiny of the Police and Crime Commissioner and the panel, to being involved in lots of different things. In fact, at one stage, I thought I had a new job, and there's always that balance, isn't it, when you volunteer to be either a non-exec or a panel member of any collective, is that you can't make it into your new job, and it shouldn't be in any way, shape, or form that process. So it was a fine balance between not taking on too much work, because myself and Max do have day jobs. But I think we finally got the balance right in being active and proactive in some of the conversations and initiatives that was cutting across the combined authority. Building on what worked, well, I suppose in order to build on what worked, you have to kind of acknowledge what didn't work, and nothing major here, but I suppose going back, and it doesn't happen now, but placing the PCC panel role within the broader AGMA exec meetings was a definite no-no for myself and Maxud, because we would literally have to fit in for about 7 to 8 minutes into a full day's executive meetings, and in principle I got the reason why that might be, but in essence it didn't do the scrutiny panel role collectively any justice, and wasn't good for myself and Maxu to allocate that time in any given day to fit in that way. The initial induction was minimal. Again, looking back, I put that down to it was new for everybody. But going forward, and I think this has been taken on board already, but going forward, new independent panel members should be presented with a full induction to include where the PCC scrutiny panel fits in the whole AGMA framework and the politics around that, small p politics that is. There's a potential for a skills analysis of new independent members. I'm not saying this has happened, but just don't think we fit in with community engagement. I felt that was a little maybe too obvious that as community members that we would obviously sit in with a community engagement lead role. There's other areas of expertise that I think panel members can and do and bring and will bring to the table in the future. I suppose the one for me that I'm a little disappointed that we didn't have much involvement with was the role of the complaints process. And that's not to say that there was loads of complaints that got dealt with that we were never privy to. It's just that there was a gatekeeping process which probably is right, but there's a gatekeeping process before we ever heard of anything that came, because we was only, as a scrutiny panel, as you know, allowed to kind of look at complaints against the PCC at this stage himself. What I heard from the community, though, was they felt that that was too late in the stage, that even through the gatekeeping process, it would have been useful for the independent, one of the independent members to work with somebody through the gatekeeping process, so that we could say that we witnessed that process from start to finish. And it just felt that it didn't offer us that transparency at that stage. And yeah, bringing up, just bringing that independent perspective to the conversations, basically. So there wasn't much negativity in our experience at all. It's been a very positive experience, but a couple of things that I think we could, or you could, build upon. And basically that's it. It's been a really fast and furious 5-6 years, starting from not knowing what we were doing to really feeling that we did have a very unique and trusted and valued role within the police and crime panel. And I hope that that's felt for the same for yourselves as members, as people have come and gone. And so really it's just down to thank yous to yourself as individual members. Obviously, thank you to Baroness Hughes, obviously, in picking up that role and coming in midway through. And to some degree, although I don't know this for sure, but potentially making some changes in how you wanted this to work, because it certainly feels like it works better since you've arrived. So thank you for that, because, like I say, it wasn't great at the beginning. Obviously, thank you to Tony Lloyd, officially, as in the former PCC. He made us very welcome, and he was very open and very, very transparent in his dealings with ourselves. Steve and his admin team have been excellent in keeping us, like you say, in the loop. And Jeanette has been a real support for both myself and Maksud, because, sometimes you do feel a little bit out of the loop. But appropriately, Jeanette brought us back into that loop and just asked if ever we needed anything, or had conversations about how we felt about things, and that was really useful. To yourselves, individuals, elected members, you've all ensured that we were valued and well received, like I said, and you've made our time in office a very positive experience, and I just hope that collectively you felt that, both from myself and Maksud. I wasn't sure whether the newly elected member was going to be here, but it was just a message to them generally to say, have confidence in the role and value your contribution, because I do think it's very valid. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. I'm sure everybody around the room agrees that was a very honest and open insight, and thank you for sharing that with us. It's important learning for everybody in the room, actually. I think it's really important that I think sometimes we do take for granted, whether it's public members, independent members, however we label them, on different bodies and committees. And it's important that actually their role is understood and valued. And I hope that we're able to pick up a lot of the learning that you've talked about this afternoon, and some of that I know we use in terms of the recruitment as well. So I hope we'll see a different phase. Just so in terms of members are aware, some of the issues that Dan was referring to in terms of the setup of the meetings, it was when the leaders of each Greater Manchester authority were sort of making up the panel. Which is why I think you had a leader bringing their chief exec and then bringing admin support, and which is why you had the 50 people in the room. And the police and crime aspects, I think, got, like you say, about 7 or 8 minutes. So I think, the system we have now, with full devolution and an elected mayor, with a deputy mayor for policing and crime, and now a specifically established police and crime panel, which doesn't have any of the leaders on it, and allows us all as portfolio leads in the community safety arena to actually have that input and have detailed discussions and challenge and scrutinise, because that's what we're here for. And I do agree with Dan that I think in the early days a lot of that was missing. It was all a very cosy relationship, and perhaps a bit too comfortable in some respects. So I share some of the views that Dan has raised. Just wondering if there's any comments that people might want to raise on that. Councillor Williams and Councillor Lancaster, I'll take you after that.
Cheers, Tamora. Thank you. Diane, nice to meet you. I'm new to this, as some of these other members are. It's only my second meeting, and I've got to tell you, being honest with you, I thought at first, I'm going to struggle with some of this, because I mentioned it to Steve, and I said, we need something to tell us exactly what our job is. And when I read the portfolios that you was given about what your job is. And then today, when I read this, I thought, yeah, well, it's there. I can see what the job is now. But the thing that's really interesting about all this, you look back and you're thinking, me, just me. So will I get stuck in? Yeah, of course I will. And I'm not struggling. I'll find some of these people on this top table and I'm going to call them and just say, look, I'm struggling with somebody. Somebody just gives it a lift. But when it comes down to it, you're thinking about the amount of involvement that you can have. I thought it would be minimal. But actually, behind the scenes, when I walk out through that door, I can have a tremendous impact. And it doesn't have to be here, does it? It could be anywhere, couldn't it? And the other thing I'm just thinking about, that when he said that some of the other police and crime panels do things differently, how differently do they do it? And the other thing I want to touch you was this. Sorry to worry. And it's to the mayor and the deputy mayor. These two guys have all been in such a short time. In 4 or 5 years, the role will probably be the same, but the remit could be totally different. What would you say to them if they were saying to you, we're struggling ourselves with this, it's our responsibility, we're accountable to you to scrutinise it, but we're struggling. Given your experience and the knowledge that you've got, what would you say to that? Sorry about that.
I think to be fair, you're right, you make some very valid points, but I think there's a balance. There's certainly a balance for the independent member. I mean, yourselves as elected members and other people around the table. For the independent member, I began to be very clear about what our role was. We was here to scrutinise, and we was here, but there's only actually a small amount of things that we're eligible to scrutinise, which goes around the recruitment of the police constable and the Precept, the council tax Precept. It's a minimal role from my point of view, which is why when we had conversations, it was really important, I think, for Greater Manchester to demonstrate that we could make this role a little bit something else, more robust, and really utilise the skills and the assets that the community, individual, either elected or independent members bring to this scrutiny panel. But basically, the scrutiny panel role is it's the boring bit, in inverted commas, in relation to what's required to scrutinise. But Greater Manchester, to its credit, made it a much more robust, meaty role, if you like. And to that degree, I think there's not much more at this stage I would add to what we currently do, because for me, like I say, I have a day job, and you've seen the amount of things, and there was some stuff we missed off that over 5 or 6 years we got involved with. But in relation to the other areas, and we spoke, we actually did meet with other police and crime panel members from across the north. And basically, they came in, did that 10 minutes around a police and crime panel, looking at Precept, looking at recruitment of police constables, etc., and was in and was out, and didn't feel as valued and as integral to the process as we did. So they do it differently. I'd like to think at this moment in time, and it's always the way that just as you leave in, it starts to feel like it starts to feel right. But that's right and proper for the next set. It feels like it's probably got. From my perspective, he's probably got it exactly right.
Jeanette, did you want to come in on the role outside of Greater Manchester?
I can do. I think Diane's probably answered it now, but similar to Diane, we do get other areas coming to talk to us about Greater Manchester Police and Crime Panel and how it works. And I'd say the fundamental difference is that collaboration that we have with the Deputy Mayor and her office as well, and fundamentally that steering group that sits below here. So a lot of areas do just do the panel work and do the legislation requirements, the statutory requirements, whereas we've gone one step further and we have that joint work plan between the panel members and Deputy Mayor's office, and really do that collaboration work. So I think that's the bit that sets us apart from the other areas, and I think that's probably what you're reflecting as well, isn't it, Diane? Yeah.
That's the bit that made it interesting, was the other things we could get involved with, because none of those things actually come with the remit of the role. All those things came with the request of the panel and individuals within the panel that wanted us to offer that individual small S scrutiny perspective.
Councillor Lancaster, you indicated earlier.
Well, first of all, can I thank you, Dan, because I've enjoyed working with you in the short period of time I have, and I've known you from another area as well. But my question really relates, you've talked about the training needs you needed as an independent member. Have you a view of what the panel needs in training? Because a lot of people sat around this table are completely new to this role. So I think someone independent's view of what the training needs are would be useful, certainly from my point of view.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, because I've often just thought about it from the independent panel members' perspective. From yourself as individuals and collectives that make up this panel as a whole, I would have initially thought that you came with the relevant skill set required because of your role in the community, within council, etc., within your localities. If that's not the case, then I suppose it's the concept of maybe a half-day, away day type session. I'm not saying you have to go anywhere, but of bringing new individual people to the table and just putting it into perspective. It's almost like a map of where it sits. I didn't know where the police and crime panel sat within all those different executive meetings and, you know, the chief execs and elected members and councillors. And it was a whole new ball game for me. So if it's a whole new ball game for me, that's not to say it's not going to be a whole new ball game for somebody else. So maybe there is for anybody there's a formalised, thorough, and robust induction into exactly what your role is, you know, required. I didn't know what the protocol was in relation to, you know, individuals, because at the very beginning it felt very much to me that there was hierarchy within the whole system, and I'm sure there was, and I get that because there's hierarchy within many systems. But it felt very hierarchical and heavy. It doesn't feel like that now, and so that's part of the learning. But going back to your question, I think if whatever induction process there is for the newly independent member, then there should be a similar and or the same induction process for any new other panel member that comes through the process of that. Thank you.
Jeanette, do you want to come in, and then I'm going to hand over to Baroness Hughes?
Yeah, I should have raised this under the minutes of the last meeting, Councillor Lancaster. You made a request at the last meeting, and I know, again, the Deputy Mayor's office has been going around the individual members talking to you about training needs. At the last Community Safety Managers meeting, only a couple of weeks ago, we asked for each of the community safety managers to have an individual conversation with all the panel members to understand what your training needs, which is the start of a process. So by the time we come to the next meeting, we're hopeful we'll have some kind of training package wrapped up for all panel members.
I don't think I was criticising that we were not taking that action. I was more interested in an independent person's view of what the training needs ought to be. And as much as I respect an officer's recommendations or members, the independent members' view would be useful. That was the point I was making.
Thank you. Baroness Hughes?
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to put on record, while we're all here, my thanks to Diana Maxood and that of Claire and my team, because certainly right from the moment I took over, you made yourselves available, and I think we developed a good way of informing each other over that period, not compromising the independence of your scrutiny and your challenge function at all. But I think that the way that you've actually given so much thought to the feedback that you'd give today demonstrates the hallmark of your contribution, to be honest, Diane. And you've actually demonstrated throughout, certainly my experience of your involvement, the way in which you completely appropriately have gone beyond the strict boundaries of the kind of legal issues that you're entitled to scrutinise, and made an enormous contribution, both you and Maxood, to the committee. And I think you've set a very high benchmark for those following. So thank you very much, genuinely. Thank you.
Okay, now we're going to move on to item number 5, which is very appropriate, which is the appointment of the new independent members. And before I hand over to Jeanette for this, I just want to thank everybody around the room who's been able to promote and publicise the recruitment campaign that we've had, everybody that took part. The Deputy Mayor was also part of the video, as well as myself and a number of others as well. And it was a really important campaign to really take out the message to our community across Greater Manchester and encourage as many people as possible to apply for the independent positions that were available for the reasons that have already been discussed, because it's an important scrutiny process. The insight and experience that independent members bring is very, very important to the work that we carry out as a panel. And I just want to briefly comment on the day of the interviews that, you know, we received obviously a large number of applications in the shortlist. It wasn't really a short, it was quite a bit of a long list that we went through, and we interviewed throughout the day, and it was, you know, a great experience to see such talent and experience come through, and people sharing their stories and their experiences around community safety issues. And I think we've made 2 fantastic appointments. And just to follow on, Dan, from the previous item, that during that day we were making the appointments, quite a lot of the decision making, I'm sure Jeanette will agree, was around how do these people match Maksud and Diane, you know, because that was a high benchmark that we set ourselves as a recruitment panel, because it's important that, you know, people are able to bring that level of expertise to the panel. So on that note, I'll pass over to Jeanette.
Thank you. You've stolen all of the thunder, but never mind. I'll just remind panel members, at the last panel meeting you approved for us to go out to recruitment for 2 independent members, recognising that Diane and Maksud's terms were up and we didn't have any option to extend them any further. We duly created a recruitment pack, and that is in your report at Appendix 1 in case any of you wanted to see it. I'd like to extend my thanks to Claire, because she did a really big job for us in promoting the 2 independent member opportunities. And we ended up having a social media campaign, as Councillor Tariq's referenced, with the independent members and the chairs starring in that to promote what the independent member was about. We published it on the Gmca website, and then also by virtue of all of you, as well as chief executives, leaders and community safety managers, we distributed it out to community contacts to get as far a reach as possible. As you'll see in the report, that campaign, and again, thanks to Claire, really did work, ended up in 71 expressions of interest for those independent members, which really shows you the reach that we made, which is really testament to that work. We then had around 23 applications, and they were then turned into 10 shortlisted for interview. So yes, it was a long list on that day, interviewing all those candidates. Myself, Councillor Tariq and Councillor Emsley then interviewed, as the report outlines, and we've came to the appointment of 2 members, and in line with the legislation we need the panel to confirm these appointments. So the 2 proposed recruitment panel members are Majid Hussain, who is currently the chair of the CCG in Oldham and also chairs the Oldham IAG. And then the other candidate is Angela Lawrence, MBE, who is the co-chair and founder of Violence Against Women, and also is the chair of the IAG in Manchester division as well. There's a bit more further detail in the report, but I'll not go through that in its entirety. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, do panel members have any questions on the recruitment process? No? Dan?
Can I just say, bearing in mind your previous comment, I can see, I know Angela Lawrence very well, worked with Angela for many years, 25 plus years within the community, and yeah, Angela is certainly another Diane, or Diane's another Angela, actually, I'll put it that way. But yes, we both function very well, come very much from a community perspective, and I think you'll get everything that you want and more with Angela. Thank you. I don't know Maggie, by the way, so I can't comment on that, but Angela will be a really good asset to the team as a whole. Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments? Okay. Just to say, obviously, you know, I have already sort of give you the impression, but the 10 candidates were all exceptional, and it was a very, very hard decision, and Majid and Angela, for various different reasons, did stand out, and I'm confident, as was the recruitment panel, that they will make a significant contribution to the work going forward, and you'll be able to see more about their background in the report that's before you today. So can I then formally move that we approve the appointment of Majid Hussain and Angela Lawrence as the 2 new independent members of the Greater Manchester Police and Crime Panel. All those in favour? All those against? Any abstentions? Okay.
Obviously, subject, Chair, to the satisfactory references being obtained.
Yeah, I can come back to that. Since I've written the report, the references have come back satisfactory, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, item number 6 is the police precept setting process. I'm going to hand over to Baroness Hughes.
Jane is here to do the detail on
right,
this, and I'd like to come in later.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. This report is one of the first of a suite of reports that we'll bring to the panel in terms of the precept setting process. So this report is very much around the actual process of setting the precepts. So there are no figures or anything like that in here. This is purely a process one. And I'll come on to the type of information that's in the other reports that help in terms of the setting of the precept and the scrutiny of them. So under the Police Reform and Social Responsibility Act, it sets out what the process for setting the precept is. So it's the role of the Police and Crime Commissioner, so in this Greater Manchester's case, the Mayor with the Deputy Mayor who set the precept. However, there is a role for scrutiny and challenge for the Police and Crime Panel, and you also have the right to veto the precept when that's presented to you in January, and this document sets out what that process is. I think the easiest page to look at is page 5, which is the flowchart diagram. So by law, we just need to bring a precept report in January where the Mayor and Deputy Mayor set out what their precept plans are. However, we've found that it's better if we bring an earlier report, which will be 29th of November this year, which gives you some more context as to what are the challenges facing policing in terms of setting out the police precepts so that you're not coming at it cold. So we will do that in November, and then we'll come back in January where they will notify what the precept proposals are. At that point, you've got a choice to either say yes or no. We will also be having discussions with the leaders as well, so it'll be a conversation between yourselves and your leaders in terms of whether there's a veto actioned. If that's the case, the panel needs to be 2/3 of the members of the panel are in agreement to veto if that's what happens. If you say you're happy with the precept, then that's great, and we just proceed along with that. If you say that you want to veto the precept, the chair will then need to prepare a report which outlines the concerns of the panel and why not. And then the Mayor and Deputy Mayor would respond with a final report and a final precept proposal. However, after that point, there is no other chance to veto the precept. The Mayor will come, Deputy Mayor will come back and say, thank you for your considerations, this is our thoughts, and this is where we stand. So that's in essence the process which we go through in terms of the formal process. However, as I've said, we over the years have brought a report in the December meeting which just gives you some background, because it wouldn't be right to bring things cold to the January meeting from there. So brought them along with me here. Obviously we've not shared them, but just taking into account the request at the last meeting and then what Councillor Williams was saying earlier, I'm happy to circulate last year's reports so that you see the content of them. And I'm also happy to meet with you to go through in detail what the content of last year's reports are, so that you feel able to contribute fully to the debate. So if I leave that with, let Steve know if you want to do that, and I'll happily do that. In terms of, I'll just briefly run through the content of the report. So the one that will come in November very much sets the scene, but some of the key points to note is that the The government grant that we receive in Greater Manchester is 80% of the funding for police. So whilst the Precept is a very important element of funding and it impacts on local taxpayers, 80% of the funding comes from the government grant. So the settlement that we get from the Home Office is absolutely critical. Now, so far we believe that that's going to happen on the 6th of December. So again, that's why we can only give you a flavour of what's happening in November. But that's a very important point and time for us in terms of that. The other element of the 6th of December is we'll also expect to understand what the Precept flexibilities or the rules are. So last year, the Home Secretary changed the Precept ones to a maximum of £12. Prior to that, it was 2% or £5, dependent on if you were in the lowest precepting areas. So the two things that we'll watch out for at the settlement time. So this report really just sort of gives you a feel for what are the issues, what are the, where are GMP in terms of demand, increase in crime, all the statistics are laid out in there. The scale of the police budget, I mean, just a headline from there is that 80% of the police budget is staffing costs, with police officers being over 60% of those staffing costs. So you can see how important it is when we get the settlement funding. And there are also a number of uncertainties as well. Even at the 6th of December, I suspect there'll still be some uncertainties around the budget that we might not find out until we get the final settlement in February. So, but one of those uncertainties I just want to hand over to Baroness Hughes to discuss, because it's quite a significant one.
Thank you. If I may, just to add one point to Jane's comprehensive summary for you. In addition to these elements of the process in terms of setting the precept that involve the committee, once we are clear that we have a proposition in terms of the level of precept, we do consult with the public about that, and you will be informed of the public's response to our question about the precept that we go out with when you come to form your view. Obviously, the budget yesterday, I'm glad I didn't hold my breath because we got no information at all about the possible settlement for police, other than the Chancellor saying that there would be a review of police funding. This has been promised for a number of years, but has yet to come forward. And I think if that looks at the distribution of government grant between different police services, that may well be welcome, because we are, as most of the metropolitan areas are outside London, disadvantaged in relation to the proportion of government grant we get in relation to our population and demand. However, we've yet to see that, and as I say, we've been promised it for many years. There was no detail on the kind of quantum of the pot at all. That was deferred to the Home Office, and we expect to get some indication on that, as Jane said, around the 6th of December when the local government settlement is announced. There's been a great deal of lobbying and pressure from individual PCCs like myself, from the Association of PCCs and from the National Police Chief Councils to the government on the settlement for police. But as I say, we don't yet know if that will result in any more generous settlement than we've had in the past couple of years. Certainly last year, as Jane said, we got still a flat cash settlement in terms of government grant, but the government pushed any increase onto taxpayers. So, we expect, if anything, that to happen again. There is, however, one piece of information that we know could potentially be quite devastating for the settlement on police, and that concerns the pension fund for police, because across various parts of the public sector, the Treasury have done an actuarial revaluation of the money needed for pensions going forward. This is an unfunded scheme, as you'll know, and have set valuation directions which for the police say that a further £470 million annually from somewhere is required. The government are going to put some money into that, but they're requiring £165 million from police services, from the employer side of police services, from next year going forward. We estimate, and it is an estimate, but you know, I think it's pretty accurate because we are the second largest police service. Our estimate of what that would mean in Greater Manchester is that we would have to find, before anything else, just under £8 million next year and just under £20 million the year after to make these increased employer contributions to what the government say is required. Now, if we were able to increase the Precept by £12 next year as we did last year, what we got from that £12 Precept would be completely wiped out by the £8 million to bolster the pension contributions next year. And that's before we get to any pay awards or before we get to look if we could possibly, as we managed to do last year, to increase the number of police officers or have any enhancements in the capability of the police to service our citizens. So it really is looking fairly gloomy at the moment, but as I say, until we see what the government say in December, we can't actually be clear. We have done a briefing on the pension issue, and we've also got copies of letters from the APCC into the government on the general budget position and on the pension issue. And if you'd like those circulated, Jane's quite happy to circulate those so you've got the information. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Baroness Hughes. I mean, it's always, this time of year, we always have a discussion as a panel around the set and install the process for the Precept. It's unfortunate, really, that you know, it's against information and stats that have come before us that mean that we're going to have to make even more difficult decisions. I know members last year, when we made that decision early in 2018, it was with a heavy heart that we agreed that Precept of £12 because we felt that there was no other option because the government had left us with no room to manoeuvre. And I was just wondering whether we ever received, I know we agreed at that meeting that I would send out a letter as chair of the panel to the Home Office, and I don't know whether we ever received a response. No, we didn't. Okay, no surprise at that. You know, I think it's important before I open it up for discussion that, you know, we keep on the lobbying efforts. The issue about the pensions, which the Deputy Mayor has raised, has been in the public domain, and it's one that the government have said that they'll look into. But I guess that, you know, there's not really much to look forward to in terms of any rabbits coming out of hats or anything like that, because it looks like a pretty challenging situation. I know the Chief Constable has also come out in recent weeks to say also he's worried about the implications for GMP and what that will mean for staffing as well. So I'd like to open it up now. I'm just conscious that we don't sort of get into a debate around the pros and cons of the Precept and our views on that, because we'll have a wider debate on the issue. This is just a part of setting the process. So, Councillor Anderson, you indicated earlier.
Chair, yes, I think Beverly's actually answered one of the points I was trying to raise in terms of the Precept and the importance of trying to crystallise concisely what we're trying to achieve and the background to it, and in terms of how we as members go out there and actually sell this to our members in our home authorities and to the residents of GM in a wider context. But I think we still need to do that, even if it's not a very pleasant message, and I think that will help at least put it in perspective and help us, justify that in conversations we have in various places. I just wanted some clarification really in terms of obviously we've got the expanded role of the panel to include fire and whether there was going to be any involvement with the fire Precept at all, or that setting.
Baroness Hughes, yeah.
The Combined Authority have proposed that, Councillor Anderson, and the government have accepted in principle that this panel take on the scrutiny role from the CA Scrutiny Committee for fire. However, it is in a backlog of regulations, about 8,000 plus I'm told, that are backed up because of Brexit. And so the statutory instrument that needs to go through the Houses of Parliament, which would just be a rubber stamping, cannot actually be rubber stamped at the minute because there's no parliamentary time. So we're simply waiting on the government to formally make that legal change in regulations. But at the moment, for this year, it looks as if the budget for fire will go through the leaders and the combined authorities budgetary process as it did last year. But hopefully we'll get these changes for next year, but that's where they're stuck.
Yeah.
Clarification, Beverly, that's very, very useful. I suppose, again, it's going back to the original point in terms of if we're able to crystallise concisely what we're trying to achieve or what we're trying to deliver through the precept, whether it's fire, whether it's the police, indeed whether it's the mayoral precept which is crept onto the bills in the last time. It's very important that we're able to convey what difference or that those precepts are making.
Councillor Freeman and then Councillor Lancaster.
Just a technical point, really. On the flow diagram, for a veto, it's two-thirds majority. But what if it's just a simple majority? Do we go down the yes route? So if it's a simple majority in favour of refusing the precept, rejecting the precept recommendation, if it's not a two-thirds majority, where do we go? Which side of the diagram?
If there's not a two-thirds one, then the precept would be accepted.
Right, I thought so. Thank you.
Councillor Lancaster.
I think we've seen in the press about the pension deficit. What I haven't seen in the press is whose responsibility is it to monitor the pension fund, and when did they know or find out that there was deficiency in it?
Can I come back to you on that one? I'll find out more information, because it's something that the Home Office managers are opposed to locally. But
I think this is part of the frustration of the National Police Chiefs and also the PCCs nationally, is that there's something of smoke and mirrors around this, and that it's a Treasury-led valuations redirection. And there's no appeal against it. It's an actuarial assessment that's done by accountants somewhere. It comes out, it's published by government, but there's very little room for gainsaying it or challenging it. You have to kind of swallow it, and that seems very unsatisfactory.
Is there not a case to argue that, in view of the anomalies which have happened this time, there needs to be a different way of resolving and monitoring pension funds?
Thank you, Councillor Lancaster. The points will be acknowledged and taken back. Are there any other comments or questions on that item? Dan.
Just very briefly, and I think it's to pick up from Councillor Anderson's point in relation to there is something around public perception, and it's not to go into today, but it's about how this information, if it is going to be utilised, the precept increase, to kind of cover some or all of this. I'm not too sure that the public will take that lying down or very kindly. It was difficult last year when it was about increasing police numbers and making the best service that we could. Police pensions, again, how that's, I'm not saying I'm against pensions, obviously, but, upping the precept or having a precept hired because money's been used elsewhere for pensions is going to have to be relayed to the public really, really sensitively, as I'm sure you're aware, but it's just to make that point again.
Yeah, I think at the last year when we had a discussion around the precept, comms and sort of relaying this back to our local authorities and then wider to our networks in our district was discussed, and we're very clear that when we do make difficult decisions that we communicate that out to the public as to why we're making them. And I know last year's justification was around the 100 extra police officers, the investment in the 101 service. So it was very clear, and we could relay that back and relate it actually to some of the challenges that people are posed, where you know, for the last 6-7 years there was no recruitment of police officers within each individual neighbourhood team. People were seeing a reduction. Perhaps the PCSO levels weren't being sustained. So there were lots of issues that had, and that was having a natural impact on the 101 service, the 101 staff. Some of them are going on to be recruited as PCSOs or as police constables. So you're right, I think that we've got to continue that public message to ensure that people understand why we're making the difficult decision, and also to relay the national situation as well, that, you know, the issues around the police grant and the implication that's having for the people of Greater Manchester, and the fact that, you know, we have over the last 12 months raised these issues individually. I know the Chief Constable has been in the press many times talking about the shocking levels of funding that GMP receive and the implications, and I think only the other day talked about a 1970s police force that he's worried about. And while all these issues are ongoing around pensions, around the police grant, and into the future, the decision we're going to make around the Precept, we're seeing demand at an all-time high, and the complexities around crime as well. You know, it's a changing world every day. So, you know, it's a very tough situation. It's important that we all communicate that out. But I'm sure when we get to that position of discussing the precepts and making a decision, we'll be able to also have a full and detailed comms plan behind it as well. Okay, if we can then, following on from that, thank you, Jane, and to the team for bringing that report. Item number 7 is standing together, the outcomes framework, and I'll hand over to Claire and Beverly Hughes.
No, it's been deferred, this item.
Oh, it has it? Sorry,
I missed that.
Yeah.
I'll deal with that on the forward plan, if I may.
Okay. We'll move on to item number 8. Apologies for that. Item 8, which is the forward plan.
Forward plan is in your papers and is a standing item for us. It's just a reflection of those items we've been notified for your agenda for the forthcoming few meetings. It's just an information item and you can see it there. And I'm happy to take any questions, and equally I'm happy to take any suggestions for additional items you might want to put on the forward look for future consideration.
Baroness Hughes.
Thank you, Chair. On the outcomes framework that we thought could be scheduled today, we're making good progress on it, but we thought it would be better coming next time because we'll have completed that work more or less for you to comment on it. But secondly, on the back of our discussion just on the budget and so on, you know, I thought really we ought to report back to you on where we are with the implementation of those additional elements that were enabled through the Precept last year, because we have made great progress there. So that might be an additional report you'd like to see next time. Okay, thanks.
Okay, so are members, are there any comments around the forward plan? Are there other items or issues that people might want to raise? Councillor Lancaster?
The 101.
Okay, do we have an update on the 101 service of progress?
I think that's what we can bring next time with the budget report. We'll bring it because we took some money back in the budget to make improvements there as well. So we'll report back on that next time.
Any other comments on the forward plan? No? Okay, that brings the end to today's meeting of the Police and Crime Panel. The next meeting is on the 29th of November. So I hope that date is secure in your diaries, and I look forward to seeing you then. Thank you.